Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's episode is brought to you by Agenda and ExpressVPN. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, as always, is my co-host Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's been a really long time since you and I did an interview on the show.
That is true.
And first of all, I thought we ought to change that.
Okay.
But I've also, over the holidays, I was thinking about how we can better incorporate your home city into this show. Because,
Oh, okay.
all right, Federico, I mean, look, Rome is a beautiful city, and it has a long and colorful history. But the hard part is really figuring out how it relates to apps. But I had an idea.
What an intro. Wow.
All
Okay.
right. I had an idea. And today, we're going to be talking to Edwin Smith of Feral Interactive, the developer and publisher of a bunch of great Mac and iOS apps. And one of those games that we're going to cover today is Rome Total War, which it just so happens was also Feral's first iOS game that was released in 2016 on the iPad. How's that sound as a tie-in to you?
Good job. You do your job very well.
All right. So that's the premise with which we're going to be starting off on and talking to Edwin today. But let's dive into the show. Thanks for being with us today, Edwin.
It's great being here, and that intro was 10 out of 10.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Edwin, Feral was making Mac games a really long time before Rome came out on the iPad. I think it was like 20 years. And I'm curious, just to kick things off, at what that transition was like. You know, what are some of the considerations you had to account for when moving from making PC-based games to things on iOS with touch?
So I think there's three broad things you think about. There's sort of the technical challenge, what kind of target audience you've got, because it's quite different on a sort of a portable device, and what kind of gameplay styles would work. So, for example, we think on the technical side, you think about how big is it, because there's like a 4 gig limit, and these days the cutscenes on most games would be heading towards 4 gig.
Yeah.
Then you've got things like specs. So phones are getting more powerful, but so are games. So you've got to pick something that isn't sort of a complete monster, what kind of graphics it's got. And then the controls. Obviously, doing a fast-paced 3D shooter would be trickier than doing, let's say, a racing game. And games with lots and lots of screens and text and controls might be quite tricky on a small phone-sized screen. And then it's just little things like, can you play in like 20-minute chunks? Can you easily sort of save your progress as you go automatically? It's those like little things which sort of you kind of narrow down what game you think could work quite well.
Yeah, when I think about it, you know, and the games that I've played most recently that you've released are Rome and Tropico. And Tropico just came out on the iPad just right before the holidays. And it's interesting looking at them and comparing them to what you can do on a desktop. There's obviously things, for instance, I'm thinking about things like in Rome, when you're doing troop movements and you're using your finger to kind of circle groups of troops and then drag to where you want them to go. And in Tropico, there's a lot of data involved in terms of tracking what's going on with the world you're building. And it seems to me that those are the kind of areas where you probably had to make some interesting choices in terms of translating them to a tablet.
Yeah, I'd say both games. We probably, before the game even made it into like our QA, we probably had spent on the design side. There's probably, I don't know, 3 months worth of paper work of just having a think about how could this work and just trying out different ideas. I think the key thing for me when we do one of these games is it isn't better or worse on a touchscreen compared to a keyboard and mouse or a gamepad. It's different. So there are some things that a gamepad does way better than a keyboard and mouse. Mm-hmm. And there are some things that touch does way better than a keyboard and mouse or even a gamepad. So what you have to do is when you look at the game, then look at the strengths of the device that we're trying to get it on and go, hey, how can we change how you interact with the game to take advantage of all of the really things which touch make really great. So, for example, you were talking about troop movement, and we were talking to sort of early on in that development, we were talking to the guy who's the sort of the father of Total War over at Creative Assembly, and we were going through the design ideas. And he was talking about how he'd been playing an early version of the game, and he was like, with the cavalry, I can put my finger on one of the sort of horse units and just send it into battle and then pull my finger back so it charges in, pulls out, and charges in again. He goes, that's so much easier to do with touch than it is with a mouse, because I'd have to issue one command, wait, then issue the other one. He goes, with a finger, I can just draw it. So that was like one kind of example of something which is better. So we kept on thinking of the most accurate thing you've got, even more accurate than a mouse, is your finger. So try and make it, especially on an iPad screen, try and make it so you can just touch things. So you need to try and make that whole paradigm kind of work and make sure that you stick to the same rules kind of no matter what throughout the game. So we had some hard and fast rules of a single tap means this. Tap and hold should always have this type of reaction. 2 fingers should always do this. If it's a secondary thing, you should glow under your finger to tell you. So it was kind of sticking to these solid rules to try and make it kind of work without a manual, because a lot of these original desktop games, there was a manual. With Rome, I think there was a 400-page manual that came with the game.
Oh wow!
No one's going to read a manual when they're playing on an iPad or a phone, so you have to make everything like intuitive. So it was just trying to sort of have a look at how can we make it. We spent a lot of time with like Google Maps, Apple Maps, things like, applications that allow you to manipulate photos. So like the photo browsers and things like that, of pinching and zooming and moving around, because people do that all the time. So if we can make the game mimic that, we don't have to teach you.
Right. I noticed that right away when I was using Tropico, because when I started playing, it was just like moving around on any map app, whether it was Google Maps or Apple Maps.
Yeah, so it was trying to tune it so it feels like it's just like one of those other ones, and then people don't know, oh, that's how Zoom works. They just know, so it's making sure it. One thing we did with Tropico is if you put your hand in, let's say, the top right hand corner and then do a rotate gesture, the camera's rotating around your fingers, not around the middle of the screen.
Okay.
And on desktop it would rotate around the middle of the screen, but if you go into Apple Maps or Google Maps, it rotates around your fingers. So it was just a small change, and then suddenly it feels right.
Right. It feels natural on the platform. I guess the flip side of that, though, is that in some areas when you're dealing with touch, you've got less precision. And I know from watching one of the videos that you guys released that one of the things you did in Tropico was you made it easy to snap buildings to roads. Can you talk a little bit about those kinds of interactions?
Yeah, sure. So what we try and work out is the things where one of them is what we call fat fingers. So that is sort of our internal shorthand, but it kind of covers 2 things. One, your finger isn't as small as a mouse pointer, and 2, your finger can actually kind of cover what you're looking at. So what we did was things where, like, if you don't know you're quite close enough when you are drawing a road or trying to place a building that has to connect to a road, we went and made it so the buildings will automatically snap to the road, and that just means that sort of you can just move a building up and down, and you can move your finger slightly left and right, but it'll just still stay attached to the road, so you can just slide it up and down and easily place it in the right position.
That's definitely, I noticed that right away when I was playing the game, because it makes it just a lot easier to deal with the things that you're building without having to concern yourself with the precision of it, as you said, with a mouse pointer. And, I guess both Rome and Tropico also benefit from the fact that they are kind of turn-based. You do something, there's an interaction, and you look to see what happens next. How does that kind of differ from some of the other games that you've released in the recent years?
Well, we had Grid Autosport, which is kind of, it has to live and die on really fast reactions for inputs. I'd say whenever you have menus that can be tapped through and it doesn't require fast reactions, what we try and do is just spend a lot of time trying to logically organize things, because you don't have as much screen real estate. So what you're trying to do there is having lots of really obvious options, a bunch of buttons, don't overly clutter it. Whereas certain sections like the 3D battles in Rome, but mostly like a racing game like Grid Autosport, it's kind of about the opposite. You're trying to get rid of absolutely everything and try and tune the actual gestures to make sure that you don't have lag and things. So one of the biggest problems we had with Grid Autosport, you can get a racing game to feel 80% right really quickly, but if someone wants to play it for a long period of time, or even 3D battles in Rome, you can get it 80% of the way there, but after someone's been playing for a certain amount of time, you get those kind of niggles of like, why won't it do something? So it's either the camera or little gestures. So I think the simpler and easier it feels, I think the developers have probably spent twice as much time tuning it. So I would say one of the things we end up doing is, I would say, Tropico, for example. Originally, we wanted to ship it a little bit earlier than we did. And one of the reasons that we delayed it is because we thought it was 80% of the way there, but it wasn't 100% of the way there. So the final 20% on controlling anything that is time critical and a mistake will cost the user is the thing that you really, really need to get right, because it's the thing which can just... It makes... If I buy an app or a game or something and then you have that kind of infuriating moment, it isn't often in the first 10 minutes. It's kind of when you realize you're no longer playing a game 2 or 3 hours after you bought it. That might not be all in one game time, but let's say next week you have a look at your screen on your phone or your iPad and you're like, oh, I'm sat on the couch. Do I want to play it? And then suddenly you load it up and then you have that same camera glitch, or the control doesn't quite work when you try and jump over something. And then you're just like, Meh. And I think that's the kind of thing which we spend a lot of time focusing on, is basically sitting down with both our QA and people from forums who we give early access to. And we basically try and work out, it's like, tell us the parts when you wanted to like throw the phone out the window because something didn't quite work, and just iterate till those bits go away. And we had quite a few examples on Tropico of the roads just constantly iterating to make sure that they worked, the snap to buildings, for example, reorganizing all of the data which you touched upon so that everything has the iPad version hot links between useful data to another piece of useful data, a bit like browsing the web almost. And the original game didn't do that. You had to sort of pull up one screen, look at everything, and then close that and then go somewhere else. And we were just like, on an iPad, you don't have time to sit there for like an hour. You might be 20 minutes on a tube or a train, bus or something. So you just want to be able to just quickly zoom around. So it was trying to optimize those things. Again, it's something that touched us a lot better, because you physically just start touching bits of the screen. So we were like, make sure that everything's got hot links, make sure everything tells you something. I think those are the kind of things which we're sort of slightly obsessed with on when we bring in games to mobile, is the interface has to... We already know we're bringing a great game because we're licensing something like Tropico, which is great, or Total War, which is an amazing series. So it's our job to allow people to enjoy that core gameplay on a completely different device.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Agenda, the note-taking app with an innovative focus on dates. The Mac and iOS app stores are full of note-taking apps and calendar apps, and you'd think that there wasn't room for something new, but then along came Agenda. The app debuted last year on the Mac and went on to become the only Mac app to win an Apple Design Award in 2018. Now, Agenda is on both the Mac and iOS. What's different about Agenda is its focus on dates and its integration with your calendar. It's a combination that makes the app perfect for business, meeting notes, daily journals, private diaries, to-do lists, bullet journals, website bookmarks, and a whole lot more. Notes are organized into a project timeline, so you can easily move between the past, present, and the future. Notes are fully Markdown compatible and can include text, headings, lists, checklists, tags, attachments, and links. In the latest release, the Agenda team added support for images and file attachments too, which makes the app the perfect hub for all the bits and pieces of a project you're working on. We were so impressed by Agenda at Mac Stories that we gave the iOS version our best new app of 2018 as part of our inaugural Mac Stories Selects Awards. Agenda also has a very interesting business model that's a great deal for customers. Agenda is free to download and use forever. Premium features are available via an in-app purchase, and when you buy that in-app purchase, it unlocks all of the current features, plus any premium features that are released in the next 12 months. The features you unlock are permanently unlocked, regardless of whether you ever pay again. There's strictly no subscription. So go now and check out agenda.com to learn more, and while you're at it, download Agenda and check it out. It's free, so there's nothing to lose. Again, that's agenda.com for an elegant new take on notes. thanks again to Agenda for supporting the show.
So, Edwin, speaking of that, I wanted to ask you about the 2018 iPad Pro, the new generation of the iPad Pro, and
Yeah.
I have a two-part question. I would like to know if you faced certain challenges when designing the UI around an iPad that doesn't have a home button, and so whether you had to make some considerations for the virtual home indicator at the bottom of the screen. But also, I wanted to get your thoughts on the extra power unlocked by the 2018 iPad Pros. So the more powerful GPU and the more powerful CPU. And I just kind of wanted to know how you approached designing for these wildly different iPads compared to the previous generations.
So I think the first time we hit this wildly different performance boost, I'll talk about the power first, was with the second generation iPad Pro. So that was the 10.5. When that one came out, it was like a whole new world. The GPU performance just took a massive leap. And again, with the 2018 iPad Pros, it's just this. So, for example, on Tropico, the game can run at a much higher frame rate and with higher graphic settings on the iPad, the latest iPad Pros, than anything else. So, and the variable rate screen is really cool. So you don't have to pick 30 frames a second or 60. You can lock it to 40, for example, if you wanted to. The real tricky thing I think we've noticed with the latest iPad Pro is there are very, very few applications that really push the new iPad Pro.
Right.
So if the new iPad Pro gets slightly warm, people wonder, but why is it getting warm? So we had quite a few people with Tropico going, the only app that makes my new iPad get warm is Tropico. and we were like, well, we basically took the graphic settings, which all the other iPads did, and we just, turned the dial to 11. And it looks, it's got extra, nearly every effect is turned up a little bit on that device. And the frame rate is double what the low-end iPad runs at. So it's super smooth, it's really beautiful, but it gets a little bit warm. So actually one of the things which we're going to be adding in an update soon is actually battery saver mode for the newer iPad Pros. So you can run them at slightly lower settings and they don't get quite as warm and you get a bit of longer battery life.
That's interesting.
Which is something we never would have guessed before we did it.
Yeah, it's amazing how it looks on the iPad Pro. I've been playing on the 12.9 and it's just amazingly smooth and the detail is just incredible.
Yep.
The other thing was just no home button. So that first came to us with Rome Total War and the iPhone X, and a little bit with Grid Autosport as well. So it's kind of subtle, but you'll notice when you're playing on those iPads, some of the warning text and the extra descriptions are very subtly slightly higher up on the middle area of the dictator's desk and things like that. So it was all kind of moving things by a few pixels to try and negate the fact that the home bar will appear, because there isn't a way of hiding that home bar. As soon as you touch the screen, it'll pop back up. So if you're playing a video or a film, you can request it to be hidden.
Yeah.
But as soon as you touch the screen, it pops back. There isn't a way of saying hide it forever, because obviously then a user could get lost. So it's all about just making some subtle little bumping up of changes. The iPhone X, for example, we spent a long time for Rome Total War on the phone, making sure that the UI didn't get clipped by the notch. And if you played that game, there's just a huge amount of text and important information constantly coming up. So making sure that sort of the notifications normally came on sort of the left of the screen, but if there's a notch there, they'd need to come down on the right hand side of the screen, and just justifying text on the side which has the notch by an extra few pixels so that it doesn't get clipped. And there's loads of like little subtle things that you don't necessarily have to do, but I think it kind of, as a user, when I buy an application that knows there's a notch and just deals with it as if it's there and it doesn't get in the way, and the same thing with the home bar, it's those like little extra things which just make it feel like it's kind of just so. And it feels really nice that sort of when we ship things, we kind of stick to those kind of standards of, if you've bought a really, really nice iPad with no home button, you don't want bits of text or UI being clipped by the home bar. So it's just little things which I think sort of add that extra little bit of something.
You mentioned the iPhone 10, and I want to explore that a little bit more because, it's one thing to bring these games from the desktop to a tablet, which ranges anywhere from the size of the Mini all the way up to the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. But when you're dealing with a phone, you're dealing with the absolute smallest screen that Apple makes. Games like Rome do have a lot of text and a lot of different views that you can navigate through. What's it like bringing those kind of games to those really small screens compared to, say, the iPad?
It's tough. I mean, to be honest, when we first did Rome, we deliberately did it on the iPad first because the initial challenge for Rome was everybody was like, can you make a game that in depth with sort of loads and loads of text on the campaign, and you've got this sort of pretty legendary 3D battle mode? Can you get all of that to work with a touchscreen without losing any functionality? Because the big thing for us was like, we want every single little bit of text, flavor, controls, it all has to be there. So we targeted getting it working on the iPad first, and then that kind of solved the problem of, yes, we can get the gestures to work, we can make it fit, we can keep all of the functionality. And there's a reason why sort of, I think it was it a year and a half between the iPad and the iPhone in the end? And we basically started looking on the feasibility of getting a phone working on the design side almost like the day the iPad version was released. Was like, do you think we could maybe do a phone version? And the other sort of stipulation we had was, well, we're only ever going to do a phone version if it's at least as good as the iPad. So one of the things we had to do was, there's a lot of screens in Rome where there's huge amounts of information. So what we actually did was break down every single screen in the game, what information's there, and then you have a look at like, what do you need to know at a glance? So it's a lot of things about making summary pages. So when you go into a settlement, you just get the basic information of what you tend to look at 80% of the time. Make sure that's instantly visible, really easy to get to, and then have the next layer of screens for the most common things you drill into, and then for the things that you might do sort of once every couple of hours, then it's kind of permissible to have that on an option off a button or something like that, and then just iterating through that. So it was a lot of actually just like playing the desktop, playing the iPad version. And I think actually at the end of it, I prefer playing the phone version of Rome to the iPad version of Rome. And I think part of that was because we spent so much time thinking about how the UI should flow. It's actually, for the campaign mode, I actually found it a lot quicker to play through on my phone because we'd added all of these summary screens and bringing stuff together and cleaning it up. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge to do it justice, I think. Especially, I think Rome was probably one of the hardest ones to pick. A game like Grid Autosport, a racing game, it fits perfectly onto a phone, but a really deep strategy game that deep, that was definitely sort of a tricky one to do, because a lot of the time when we released the iPad version, people said, well, obviously it's not on phone because it's not possible. So we didn't want to release a phone version and then everybody go, well, yeah, it wasn't possible. So yeah, it took us a sort of 18 months of hard work and a lot of sort of hard work from both sort of developers and our test teams of just playing it and finding the little things, and I don't like this doesn't quite work. Things like acceleration curves on a small phone screen, zooming in and out works very differently when you have a nice big 9-inch, 10-inch iPad screen compared to sort of, we support a iPhone 5S, and that's a tiny screen.
Yeah.
So making sure that a gesture that works when you can move your finger 2 inches for a subtle movement, for when your finger needs to move a few millimeters for the same subtle movement, is it just takes a lot of trial and error of tuning and playing around with things.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by ExpressVPN, the high-speed, secure, and anonymous VPN service. We've seen a lot in the media lately about online security breaches, so it's only natural to worry about your data and where it's going, especially when something as simple as sending an email can put your private information at risk. Chances are you're being tracked by social media sites, marketing companies, and possibly even your internet provider. And not only can they record your browsing history, they can also sell it to people who want to profit from your information. You can take back your privacy with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN works by securing and anonymizing your internet browsing. It encrypts your data and hides your public IP address. You can turn on ExpressVPN protection with just one click. The easy-to-use app runs seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, or tablet, and it costs less than $7 per month. ExpressVPN has been rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar. It even comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep the bad guys away from your data, you need ExpressVPN. My test of a great VPN is whether I forget that I'm even using it, which ExpressVPN passes with flying colors. You just turn it on with that single click and let it silently go about its business protecting you in the background. It's fast, doesn't require any fiddling around, and doesn't cost an arm and a leg, which makes it perfect in my book. If you don't want your online history in the hands of your internet provider or data resellers, ExpressVPN is the answer. Protect your online activity today. And find out how to get 3 months free with a 1-year package at expressvpn.com/appstories. Again, that's expressvpn.com/appstories for 3 extra months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/appstories to learn more. Our thanks to ExpressVPN for their support of App Stories.
So I wanted to switch gears a little and talk about the business of selling these types of games on the App Store. So Feral makes paid upfront iOS games. Then they usually cost more than what you can typically find on the App Store. And I kind of wanted to know from you, do you feel like adapting these PC games maybe helps with the perception of selling a premium iOS game? Or do you feel like there's another factor at play, which may be like the history of Feral, maybe like the pedigree of the developer, maybe a factor that sort of helps sort of having users accept the fact that you're selling a premium experience? And just what do you feel like are some key strategies to selling this kind of paid upfront, premium priced, for the context of the platform, game on the App Store?
So, I mean, I think for us, we were sort of very lucky to have, the best part of 20 years worth of Mac users knowing about us and having, being able to have our first iOS game to be a total war game. Rome Total War is just like a fantastic game to bring to a new platform because everybody knows what it is, and that certainly helps. I think the other thing is you have to position where you are. We firmly believe that what we do is we're going to take a really great sort of what people I guess call AAA games, and we're going to bring them to your portable iOS device. We're going to not remove any features, so it's going to be feature identical with the original game. It's going to be hand tuned for your device. We'll redesign the interface and sometimes even add new features. And we're going to charge you sort of a relatively high for iOS, but relatively low for a AAA product price for the game. And what I think, there's a lot of people getting sort of burnout from these games that are great, but sort of you feel like you're constantly being asked to sort of buy in-app purchase this or that, or unlock this feature. So I think there's 2 ways of doing it. A lot of people are very successful with getting a really huge install base and then getting their revenue from in-game adverts or IAPs. But sort of coming from our background of these, really big 200 hours worth of gameplay games, our sort of skill set and our experience and what we like doing is just saying, actually, you give us sort of $10 or sort of, $12.99, and we're going to give you a game that you can play forever. So, we kind of make it very clear that that's sort of how we do stuff. So I think sort of, with Grid Autosport, we were like, pay once, race forever. The whole idea is you get 100 cars, about 100 different track variations. You've paid your sort of $10, and then that's it. You now have a game that you can pick any one of those 100 cars straight away, any one of those 100 levels straight away, or if you're in Rome, you can play any of the factions straight away. Tropico, you've got sort of an island builder, so you can build infinite number of islands, and you can just play for 1,000 hours, and it's not like the turns take longer because you haven't bought sort of
Right.
golden coins or things. So I think that there's many ways of doing things, but I think for the kind of games we're doing, we decided to go sort of the that kind of premium pay once, and then just be very upfront about it, of going, yeah, we charge more than like the $2.99 games, but we're going to give you a game that you might have played and loved on your desktop, and now you can play it on the go.
Yeah.
And we're going to charge you sort of one slightly higher price, but it's kind of a fair price for a fair amount of content.
I know that John and I wish that more developers had that approach to iOS games. My final question, Edwin, is about something that is not necessarily a priority for Apple, I think, and that maybe some developers do not necessarily consider when making their games. Digital preservation of iOS games. So the idea that sooner or later, either some technical constraints are going to be introduced by Apple, or some App Store policy is going to change, or a new version of iOS is going to break your game, and suddenly people will not be able to download it or use it anymore. First of all, I wanted to have your take on this problem, but also I wanted to know whether whether at Feral you implement some techniques, or you have some policies or tools in place to make sure that new versions of iOS or new screen sizes are like making sure that these games can stand the test of time as much as possible.
Sure. I mean, I think we've always, as a company, been very keen to keep our games alive for a long period of time. So, for example, we've still been patching Rome Total War for desktop, and we released that game 8 and a bit years ago. We've got games that we've patched in the Mac App Store. Recently, we updated Medieval 2 Total War to 64-bit and using metal renderers. So we tend to think there's a lot to be gained, like as a company and as a reputation of being seen as like a company who looks after their games for long term. I mean, I don't think sort of games you can't maintain things forever, but having that idea of if we can just constantly maintain a game or patch a game and look after it and make sure it doesn't have glitches, not only does it mean that you can keep selling it, but also it kind of, the next game that's coming out, we saw some really nice comments from people when we were just about to release Tropico, and people were like, well, is it any good? And people were like, is it going to have a problem? Or people were like, well, Rome came out on iOS, and they've patched it multiple times when the new OS has come out with new features, and they've optimized it for new devices. Same thing with Grid Autosport. So I think it is tricky, especially when I think something is sort of not quite an immature platform, but like mobile devices are growing at such a speed right now in terms of the technology and the functionality and the features. Preservation takes a lot more time and effort, I think. So let's say like on Mac OS X or Windows, for example, there's so much more sort of, they've been around for so long now that sort of when a new OS comes out, generally things tend to keep working. Whereas with sort of iOS and Android, the pace is so quick that things iterate and you tend to get more things that break. So for example, Android and iOS, there's a notch on the phone. So you could have had a game that worked perfectly, a notch comes out, and now you need to make changes. There's just loads of little innovations like that. Phones now have curved corners. There's no the home bar you mentioned earlier. So I think that makes digital preservation a lot harder, and also the digital market of what works in terms of games and making a profit has changed quite a lot. So people maybe sort of are trying to move on to the next big thing. So some of these games which haven't been preserved was because it was kind of a work for hire thing. They made the game, it got released by the publisher, but the developers are off doing something else. So one of the things we are is we publish the game, but we also develop it. So I think that also helps. It makes us a lot more motivated to try and preserve our games because we both sell them and we develop them. So we can have a look and say, oh, we know this new OS is coming out. Let's take advantage of that instead of saying, oh, we're going to have to waste some time and money making a patch instead of making a new game. We can also, to a certain degree, go, but we can add in all of these extra things, make a really cool big deal out of it, and we'll entice loads of new users in as well. So, we did that with Grid Autosport when all of the new phones came out. We also tied it in with loads of new graphics settings, new performance, and a little bit of digital preservation on fixing a bunch of things that wouldn't work necessarily on the latest devices. So yeah, I think it's very tricky, and especially for smaller indie companies, if the game is no longer sort of up there in the store, taking the opportunity cost of maintaining them sometimes looks like a sort of a bad choice. But I think sort of we take it a little bit on the opposite of just sort of, if you maintain your product and keep on making it, make it better, make it sell for longer, then also you kind of get that, you get a bit of a halo effect of people are willing to buy Tropico because they know if there was a little glitch with something on their new device, there's a history of us patching it and everything. So if you get a minor glitch, people go, oh, it'll be okay. Feral have got a reputation for releasing updates. I was a big Blizzard fan growing up, and Diablo 2 was patched so many times. When Diablo broke on my Mac, I was like, oh, it's okay, these guys will fix it because they've got a good reputation. So I think those kind of things can help. There are developers out there who have that reputation for sort of looking after their customer, not just wanting to make the sale and then you're on your own. So yeah, it's tricky. Everybody does it their own way, but I think that's kind of what we aim for.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach, and I really do hope that a lot of other developers kind of take Feral's approach to these kind of things. I think that's probably a great place to stop. I really want to thank you, Edwin, for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation that I'm looking forward to releasing and getting out to our listeners.
It's been wonderful having a chat. Thanks for having us.
Thanks again. I also want to thank our sponsors for this week's show, Agenda and ExpressVPN. And as always, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net and on Twitter, where Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.